This tutorial on electing our bishops is presented by Dr. Joseph F. O'Callaghan, Professor Emeritus of Medieval History at Fordham University. He is the former director of the Center for Medieval Studies at Fordham and a past president of the American Catholic Historical Association. Professor O'Callaghan is an authority on medieval Spain and medieval institutions. He is the author of the book, Electing Our Bishops, How the Catholic Church Should Choose Its Leaders, published by Rowman and Littlefield in 2007.
Faced with the crisis of priestly sexual abuse, the American bishops in 2002 proclaimed their adherence to the twin principles of accountability and transparency and adopted a tepid statement promising fraternal correction. Nevertheless, the faithful are left without any assurance that the bishops will act on those principles. 2 years later, Pope John Paul II admonished the bishops to commit themselves, quote, to creating better structures of participation, consultation, and shared responsibilities, end quote. Thus far, there is little evidence that they have taken his words to heart. At present, there are no effective structures in place that would enable the people to require an accounting from their spiritual leaders. The need for structures of accountability is clearly evident, and the history of the Church points to just such a means, namely the diocesan, provincial, national, and ecumenical synods or councils held from the earliest times. The terms synod, from the Greek, and council, from the Latin, have essentially the same meaning. For the most part, these were assemblies of bishops gathered to discuss and to resolve a wide range of issues concerning the life of the Church, including creedal statements, questions of liturgical practice, the sacraments, and the spiritual life and discipline to be observed by the diverse members of the Christian community. Canons and decrees enacted by church councils, organized systematically, are the basis of the modern code of canon law. The conciliar mode of government characterized the Church from the earliest times as councils, large and small, assembled throughout the Christian world whenever significant matters needed resolution. The very first example is the Council of Jerusalem in 64 AD, which authorized the admission of Gentiles to the fledgling Christian community. In the 3rd century, numerous councils were held at Carthage in North Africa under the leadership of St. Cyprian, the bishop. Writing to his priests and deacons around 250, Cyprian said, quote, "It has been a resolve of mine right from the beginning of my episcopate to do nothing on my own private judgment without your counsel and the consent of the people," end quote. Thus, from the earliest times, bishops, clergy, and people came together to act on issues of common concern to the Church. The great debate concerning the nature and person of Jesus Christ prompted the Roman Emperor Constantine to summon all the bishops to the First Ecumenical Council at Nicaea in 325. The council drew up the Nicene Creed that we recite at Mass. Acknowledging the important role of councils in the life of the Church, Nicaea declared that the bishops of each ecclesiastical province should meet in provincial councils twice yearly. Although hundreds of councils were held in those early centuries, the acts and canons of only a small number are extant. They were sent to bishops in other parts of the world so that everyone might know what had been done. As Western Europe fell under the rule of the Germanic invaders from the 5th century onward, church councils continued to function vigorously in Spain, Gaul, Italy, and Britain. Major collections of canons of these councils were compiled and distributed among the churches of the West. As conciliar enactments grew in number, several scholars organized this diverse body of canons systematically and topically so as to form a code. That was the basis of canon law until the publication of the modern code in 1917 and its revision in 1983. As other theological controversies arose, successive Roman emperors summoned the next 7 ecumenical councils. All told, there were 8 from 325 to 869, meeting in eastern cities such as Nicaea, Constantinople, Ephesus, and Chalcedon. These were believed to represent the entire church as they brought together bishops from many provinces. Most of them were Greek. The Pope did not summon, nor did he attend any of the first ecumenical councils, though he usually sent representatives and a synod to the actions taken. Political differences between the emperors ruling from Constantinople and the barbarian kings in Western Europe contributed to the schism between the Greek and Latin churches. Theological and liturgical disputes resulted in the Schism of 1054, which persists to the present day. One of the consequences of the schism was that no ecumenical councils, truly representative of East and West, have been held since 869-70. The 13 ecumenical councils held thereafter, from 1123 to Vatican II, were all held in Western Europe and were convoked by the Pope and generally attended by Latin bishops. These Western councils are not recognized as ecumenical councils by the Eastern Orthodox churches because they do not represent the entire church. While the ecumenical councils have attracted the greatest attention, provincial and diocesan councils were regularly convened throughout the Middle Ages and into modern times. Physical evidence of the importance of councils in the history of the Church can be seen in the 52 volumes compiled by Cardinal Mansi in the 18th century. These assemblies not only dealt with issues of doctrine and discipline, but they were also opportunities to hold a bishop to account. Bishops were elected by provincial councils and were sometimes deposed by them. From the 11th century onward, the conciliar mode of church government encountered the growing challenge of papal power. However, the papal monarchy itself faced a serious challenge at the end of the 14th century. After a long residence in the French town of Avignon, the papacy returned to Rome in 1377. When the Pope died, a disputed election took place. One of the claimants remained in Rome, while the other withdrew to Avignon. The Great Western Schism lasted from 1317 to 1418. Many proposals to end the schism were put forward, such as the resignation of both popes or the convocation of a council. Faced with this dilemma, cardinals on both sides summoned the Council of Pisa in 1409, which deposed the Roman and Avignon popes and elected another. However, as the first two still refused to step aside, Europe was now divided in its allegiance to 3 popes. To resolve this grave crisis of authority, the Emperor Sigismund summoned the Council of Constance in 1414. The council ousted all 3 popes, and in 1418 elected a new one who was generally accepted, thereby bringing the schism to an end. The council also set the principle of conciliarism against the unbridled authority of the Pope by enacting 2 decrees. In Haec Sancta, the council declared that the final authority in the Church is a general or ecumenical council representing the whole body of the faithful, and the Pope, like everyone else, is subject to it. By the decree Frequens, the council hoped to establish the regular convocation of ecumenical councils every 10 years. All of this frightened the papacy, which sought to thwart the conciliar movement in every way. Papal fears of conciliarism delayed until 1545 the convocation of Trent, the Council of Trent, to deal with Protestantism. By then, the division between Protestant and Catholic Europe had solidified to such an extent that reconciliation was impossible. In its concern for the reform of the Church, the Council of Trent declared that in order to ensure fraternal cooperation and correction, bishops were required to summon diocesan synods each year, and archbishops had to convene provincial councils every 3 years. Papal suspicion of councils was so ingrained, however, that 300 years elapsed between the end of the Council of Trent in 1563 and Pius IX's convocation of the First Vatican Council in 1870. Vatican I's proclamation of papal infallibility added new strength to the papal armory. Infallibility had the effect of weakening the conciliar mode of government because it effectively entrusted the final determination of fundamental issues of faith and morals to the Pope, who had no need to convene a council for that purpose. After the election of John Carroll as the first bishop of Baltimore in 1789, the American Church was in many ways a conciliar church, as two examples will show. First, early in the 19th century, John England, Bishop of Charleston, South Carolina, drew up a constitution for his diocese, providing for an annual convention composed of two houses, one of priests and the other of the elected representatives of the laity. He also argued that councils should be held frequently and that, quote, no affair of general importance to the American Church should be undertaken unless after deliberation in council, end quote. The second example are the 10 provincial councils of Baltimore meeting almost every 3 years from 1829 to 1869, and 3 plenary councils of all the American bishops meeting at Baltimore in 1852, 1866, and 1884. In the 20th century, the American bishops have abandoned plenary councils in favor of a national conference that usually meets twice a year and whose decisions must all be approved by Rome. The Vatican has consistently limited and undermined the authority of national episcopal conferences. The promulgation of papal infallibility and the concomitant notion that councils were no longer as important as they used to be led to an alteration of the Council of Trent's decree that diocesan synods should be held yearly and provincial councils every 3 years. The Code of Canon Law, for example, in 1917, required the convocation of diocesan synods every 10 years and provincial councils every 20 years. Vatican II expressed the hope that synods and councils might flourish with renewed vigor, but it set no time for their convocation. The 1983 code ruled that provincial councils should be held whenever a majority of the provincial bishops determined that the moment was opportune. Whenever the bishop, on the advice of the priest council, deemed it opportune, he could summon a diocesan council or synod. Following the Second Vatican Council, some bishops convened diocesan synods attended by priests, deacons, nuns, and laymen and laywomen, but the practice has fallen into disuse. In my own diocese of Bridgeport, diocesan synods were held in 1961, 1971, and 1981, but the practice has since been abandoned. The Church cries out today for new structures that will hold bishops accountable to the priests and the people they lead. A return to the earlier conciliar tradition of the Church will give new life and vigor to Christ's body. Diocesan, provincial, national, and ecumenical councils or synods that are fully representative of the whole body of the faithful, bishops, priests, deacons, religious, laymen, and laywomen, and possessing deliberative authority on every issue that affects our spiritual lives, doctrinal, liturgical, disciplinary, administrative, and financial, are essential. Thank you very much.